Hey everyone, if you want to support the ongoing writers and actors strike, go to entertainmentcommunityfund.org and make sure your donation is designated to film and television. This isn't a strike fund. It is for those who are hurt by the AMPTP's actions that caused the strike in the first place. Everything made in the world of film and television would not be what they are without these talented folks. We at Renegade Animation and Renegade Pop Culture stand with the multiple unions that are on strike right now. With all that said, if you like what we do, please give us a like, a follow, and a rating on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to us. We are everywhere. Also, support our Patreon. That way we can keep doing what we love, and that's talking about animation. And now, on with the show.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Renegade Animation on the Renegade Pop Culture Podcast Network. My name is Mike. I'll be your host for this evening. Joining me, as always, is the animation guru himself, Cameron.
Howdy, howdy.
And boy, we have a pretty special episode tonight. We've got reviews for My Adventures with Superman, the complete first season. And we have not just one, but two Ghibli films to discuss. First, we have 2014's When Marnie Was There, directed by Hiromasa Yonebayashi. And then, of course, Hayao Miyazaki's 1997 classic, Princess Mononoke. But first, let's finish up our thoughts on My Adventures with Superman. I believe the last time we talked about the first 3 episodes.
Yeah, we talked about the first 3 episodes right before things hit the fan, and a shocker for this new iteration, they just get everything out in the open right then and there with the 4th episode. Lois knows Clark's Superman. Basically, her and Jimmy know Clark's not from this world. And we get to learn a little bit more about the backstory of Clark, where he was probably not sent there because of like the original origin where the planet exploded and what have you. But we'll get to that in a moment. And I have to say, it's probably because of recency bias. I will fully admit to that. I think this is my favorite version of Superman in terms of writing, character dynamics, and the world that they have crafted. I know a lot of people love the Bruce Timm stuff. I like that stuff too, when he was collaborating with Paul Dini. But this new Superman brings like an entirely different flavor to a character that has kind of needed it.
I would agree with that. I would say over like the past decade or so, too many writers and filmmakers have tried to, instead of just telling a Superman story, they try, I think, a little bit too hard to sort of reassess Superman's place in the world, where this series is just like, yeah, we're making a Superman show, and they're not really wasting any time.
And I know a lot of people right now, because of the ongoing strikes, are talking about like, man, we need longer seasons to flesh everything out. And I get that. I agree. But with all that said, I think with the 10 episode limit for at least right now, they paced it out well enough. I think the story was kept compelling because right after Lois and Jimmy are in on Superman's secrets, they introduce stuff like, how do you say his name? Mr. The little dimension.
Mixia Spitlick.
That individual. And I loved this interpretation of him, even though I'll always have a fondness for the late Gilbert Gottfried's version from the 90s cartoon. And I like that the show brings in these elements that you know that they'll probably tackle sooner or later. But I like the fact that it's pushing against those tropes, like how the League of Loises are like hey, Superman might go a little ballistic and kill people at one point or another. And I'm glad that they're like, yes, but who knows in the overarching world of multiverses what will set this one off or if it will be set off. Why does every universe need to feel like the same thing's going to happen? The same argument we had in conversation we talked about with Across the Spider-Verse. I also liked the story arcs that ran throughout the season. I like that Superman got to that point of like, I can't save everyone, or it's going to be extremely tough to do so, and almost a sort of impossible task. And then we find out who the actual general is and his connection to one of the other characters in this show. So, spoiler alert from here on out, we find out that the general that Amanda Waller was working with is Lois's father. And I don't know why I didn't pick up on it, but it makes so much sense.
I knew from the beginning that was General Lane. I get that it's probably supposed to be a little bit of dramatic irony because in the fourth episode, Lois talks very negatively about her father and how that's the reason why she hates secrets and lies. And don't worry, we'll address that in a minute. And that's why initially she's like, before she figures out Superman's identity, she's like, I'm going to expose this hero and tell all of his secrets to the world. She has an emotional reason for doing so.
Yeah, no, a lot of these character beats make so much sense. And is Lois Lane's father in the military in the comics? I assume,
Yes.
like, okay, so there's a case for me because I don't read the comics. I shouldn't have to do homework to enjoy a Superman cartoon, since most Superman shows are basically the same in a lot of regards. But I found it a pretty good twist for those because not everyone's going to know that. But knowing like the hints and character bits that are sprinkled throughout the season, there's going to be a big reveal about who Lois's father was.
Oh, of course.
And I like that they went and continued the tech direction with a majority of the villains. Like, we got to see parasites and what was the one who used like fire and such?
I believe that's Heatwave.
And I know a lot of people are upset that it's not super close to the Bruce Timm Justice League or Superman and Batman incarnations, but if you're going to start fresh with Superman, it's good to start fresh from the ground up. So I'm fine with the villains being more tech-based for right now because we already have a magic-based villain who I'm sure we'll see again in probably part 2.
That's honestly what I'm kind of thinking as well.
They took some very interesting directions with the characters. Like, I loved the trio that we meet in episode 3. I like the fact that not all the supervillains are smart. Like, a lot of supervillains and crooks and criminals are not smart. Most of the time, they get by with violence or just on their feet and what have you.
Yep.
And it makes sense for Parasite to be who he is and has the most anger towards Superman. But let's be realistic, though. How much different is Parasite compared to a normal, everyday Silicon Valley tech bro?
That's a fair point.
The only difference is that he has a mech suit that he can suck power out of everyone. I like the twist of what happens after the big superhero showdown. We first have the little inkling of a world outside of Metropolis with Vicky Vale showing up. Though I like that they keep her, like, they don't be like, oh, gasp, she was from Gotham or something like that. I mean, I'm sure we'll see glimpses of other superheroes, but I'm glad that they're keeping it pretty self-contained for right now.
The most important thing is these first episodes have to keep the focus on its central character. That doesn't mean they can't bring in other characters like Deathstroke or Amanda Waller or Vicky Vale, but it's nice that they kept things pretty small while hinting at a larger DC universe to come.
Yeah, I mean, like, no offense to stuff like what was it, the early 2000s, the Batman. The problem with that show that I found when I watched the later seasons was the fact that they kept introducing Justice League members and villains outside of Batman's rogues gallery as a feeling of just like they need to liven things up, like a act of desperation to keep the viewers coming back. Since, it's always tough to keep a show going after 2 to 3 seasons. Unless you have like a good hook. And at the very least, stuff like Justice League was all about the different team ups and such. So I just like that it's all about Superman right now. And I was not expecting the final episode of this part 1 to be a Thanksgiving episode with the best story arc and the most relatable story, trying to get that freaking turkey to cook properly.
Seriously.
The bane of every Thanksgiving or holiday family get together struggle of making sure the turkey is cooked. I loved how they handled Clark's parents. I love that they're both very, very supportive and each have their own individual identity and personality to them. They're not just, we're here for Clark, and that's it. I like that we get the reveal of Lois and her father's connection, and of course there are going to be bad people in this show. That's just going to happen. But I do like the layers that they throw at the general, and I like the backstory they give him with apparently years ago, 20 or so years ago in the show, a bunch of Kryptonians came to Earth to basically take it over, but then something happened and then they just vanished, which I assume means that Krypton did explode. But they're not really giving us a answer for that right now. They just kind of vanished out of the blue. Like, he comes off as a purely sinister individual, but he has, like an onion, layers.
The thing I like about Sam is he's not evil, but he's definitely jaded. So he has a very different view of Superman than, say, like your average citizen on the street.
And they justify it. They justify every single part. I cannot believe how stupid the discourse for this show got throughout this whole season.
Oh my God. This gave me one of the biggest headaches. I know it's a very easy comparison to make, comparing Lois to Amber, but no, these two characters are not the same in the way you think they are. And it's not that I ever hated Amber's character in Invincible. The reason those comparisons don't work is because the specific details surrounding each respective reveal is completely different. And in this show, Lois's emotional state and her motivations for doing anything are pretty airtight.
Both shows have extremely justifiable reasons for them to not absolutely trust the main character. And the fact that, honestly, even with Twitter being as terrible as it is right now, a lot of y'all, at least the bad eggs of the fandom, and I'm directing this at them, y'all are so pathetic and y'all really hate women. Like, it really shows that they would rather have someone who does not question their ethics or their actions and to get away with cheating. And you can say it's not a good idea to paint an entire like brush stroke with these twits, but the means are justified for with what happens in this first part story.
I think what it comes down to is these criticisms imply that women aren't allowed to be flawed. They're not allowed to make mistakes. They have to be like the beacon of perfection, or else they're just completely unlikable.
And they can't question people. Like, God dang it, y'all. Like, this is why I keep pushing myself away from fandoms and fans of this stuff, because so many of y'all turn out to be really garbage and have extremely bad takes. It's like y'all don't even pay attention to the shows.
Exactly.
Or just anything. You don't question anything. Lois had every right to be mad at Clark for hiding the secrets due to her upbringings and her mistrust with her father. Hey, now that we got that out of the way, though, I thought it was a very good finale, and I'm curious to see where Clark's relationship with that AI or ship continues on, because it's like the ship's recording was more on Clark's side than the invaders that the general knew way back in the day.
I'm very interested to see where that goes from here. And I'm also curious to know more about the supposed antagonist that they teased for the next batch of episodes.
Well, obviously they were going to have to come sooner or later. And we know one of them is obviously Brainiac, doing his Brainiac thing of quite possibly helping out this individual for his own needs. I mean, come on, it's Brainiac. He's a robot who doesn't care about living things. He'll do whatever it takes. It has to be Zod, right? The other one? Like, it can't be anyone else. It's Zod. Well, especially with the not subtle, I will make them kneel.
Yeah, no, that has to be Zod. But here's the interesting thing. For those who don't know, typically in the comics, Brainiac is the one responsible for the demise of Krypton. So there has to have been some sort of change, or Brainiac is kind of being a manipulative asshole and has convinced Zod that there is a reason that these two should team up.
I mean, I think it's going to happen. And who knows, we might even get Lobo next season or
Ooh, that would be
next
fun.
batch. Yeah, like they still have a few villains that they haven't introduced yet. And I like the fact that there's now the possibility that like the villains don't need the tech, or at the very least, Livewire doesn't. But I want to see if that like expands on the other characters as well. But I have to say, my favorite episode though is when we are introduced to Monsieur Mala and the Brain. I thought their back and forward was perfect. And kudos to the team and the writers who made this show. They kept the gay aspect of the characters.
They are one of those happily married couples who, I don't know if they ever officially got married, but it doesn't matter. They are just adorable together.
I love their reaction when they're talking to Jimmy and they're telling them about their whole tragic backstory. And then Jimmy's just like, yeah, my friends ditched me to not come to a camping trip. And the looks on their faces made me and my friend laugh out loud so hard, because they're just like, that is not the same thing. That is not the same thing, you little punk. And I just very much enjoyed this show from start to finish. I was pretty happy that the show was stellar from episode 1 to episode 10.
Yeah, and I think I can say this officially now. My Adventures with Superman is my second favorite show of the year so far, right behind Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur.
I know, same. I'm surprised that superhero shows have taken up my two favorite spots of my favorite TV shows of this year. But it's kind of a welcome surprise, because I haven't really been in love with a lot of comic book superhero stuff for the past 3 years or so. Like here and there, I'll find something I like, but mostly it's just kind of eh.
It just reaffirms my thesis that superheroes have typically worked the best in animation in a serialized format.
There's a truth to that kernel. I can't wait to see what else happens. They've said there's a season 2, but of course, with what's going on with the entertainment industry, it's probably just going to be a second batch of episodes. But we'll see. If you, for some reason, have just waited for the show to wrap up and such, it's all on Max right now. I definitely give it a watch, or give it a watch however you want to.
Yes, agreed.
But now we move on to what was the last Ghibli film for a few years, with Hiromasa Yonebayashi's 2014 Oscar-nominated film When Marnie Was There. And like we just said, it's directed by Hiromasa Yonebayashi, with a screenplay by Masashi Ando, Keiko Niwa, and Hiromasa himself. And if Masashi Ando sounds familiar, they worked on a ton of Ghibli stuff, from Only Yesterday, Porco Rosso, Pompoko, pretty much most Ghibli stuff. But there's also like Tokyo Godfathers, Ghost in the Shell 2, Tenkanken Crete, Paprika. Like a lot of the great Japanese animated films from the past decade.
Also, The Deer King from last year.
Not only as an animator, but writer and director on stuff. Like they've had their feet in the pool pretty much for 2 decades, or almost 3 now. And we follow Anna Sasaki while she stays with her relatives in a town in the Kushiro wetlands in Hokkaido. Anna comes across a nearby abandoned mansion where she meets Marnie, a mysterious girl who asks her to promise to keep their secrets from everyone. As summer progresses, Anna spends more time with Marnie and learns the truth about her family and everything else, which we'll get to. This would have been, back then, a great, if bittersweet end to the Ghibli filmography, until they kind of ruined it with The Earwig and the Witch, and then gained it back with the recent festival screenings of The Boy and the Heron. Because right after this, Yonebayashi left Ghibli and then made Studio Panak, which then made Mary and the Witch's Flower back in 2017. And I very much love this movie. I saw this back in 2015, and I didn't know what quite to expect. I saw the subtitle version, so recently it was the first time I watched this movie with the dub. I just love this movie. I haven't read the original book by Joan G. Robinson, but this movie does make me want to see what the original novel was like.
I haven't read the novel either, but I am definitely curious to check it out and see why Ghibli felt this was a movie they had to make. And now that I've seen the movie, I know exactly why this is a favorite for a number of people, including a former Renegade, Jacob, who I believe this is like one of his favorite movies of all time. And when I told him that this was going to be one of the next ones that we cover, he was very excited.
Well, what's interesting is it's one of the few Ghibli films to be nominated that's not Isao Takahata or Miyazaki at the helms. This is Hiromasa's second film after Arrietty, which I think it shows how much better When Marnie Was There is compared to Arrietty.
It feels like he's found his voice. This is only his second feature, but it feels like fully coming to his own as a filmmaker.
And to think he got his start in 1997 making Princess Mononoke as an in-between animation and cleanup animation person. What a funny coincidence that we're going to be talking about that next.
Right?
I would say this is another Ghibli film where the whimsy in this one is once again downplayed outside of this weird spiritual, like, I don't even think it's a supernatural thing. Or I wouldn't label the interactions between Marnie and Anna to be like a ghost, but how would you describe it? Do you think it's more supernatural than it is, or?
I think this movie definitely operates on dream logic more than any sort of like tangible supernatural element, if that makes any sense.
It's about Anna, who feels isolated and alone in this world. And she finds this mysterious young girl named Marnie that she can only see at night, who apparently lives in this mansion that's across the ocean water. She learns about how Marnie was this very much caged bird, which I wonder if this film took some elements from, oh, what was it called? If you've seen Liz and the Bluebird, you'll know what I mean. But it's all really about Anna's coming of age and realizing that she is not alone in this world, and that there have been people who have been there for her always, even if she feels alone. And it's a slow burn in terms of how the story unfolds, because it's only 103 minutes, not the longest Ghibli film. Princess Mononoke is actually longer.
Mm-hmm.
It's mostly just her learning to open up, learn about the connections that she makes with the people in the town, which include like this woman who does these amazing paintings, a young girl who's moving into the building where Marnie's supposed to be, and builds up her bond with the aunt and uncle. I love those two characters.
They were delightful.
So let's talk a little bit about the cast here. So for the dub, we have, for Anna, is voiced by Haley Steinfeld. Marnie is voiced by Kiernan Shipka, who a lot of y'all would probably know more from Avatar: The Legend of Korra as Jinora.
I was going to say The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, but that's a good pull too.
Oh yeah, that's right. And Hiromasa and Setsu Oiwa are voiced by Gray Griffin and John C. Reilly. And their performances are much more subdued compared to most Ghibli human characters that we encounter, especially different from the last film, where we felt the villain of that film was a little too cartoonish. And I loved the back and forth that John C. Reilly and Greg Delisle had with one another. Then we have Hisako, the woman with the painting, voiced by Vanessa Williams. Yoriko, Anna's, well, we'll talk about it here, adopted mom, is voiced by Gina Davis. Sayaka, the young girl that Anna befriends, is voiced by Ava Akers. The kind of bratty schoolgirl that they encounter at like the festival and such, Nobuko Kadoya, is voiced by Rainy Rodriguez, who we would know at least from this podcast on Jurassic World Camp Cretaceous as Sammy Gutierrez, a tale dark and grim, who plays Gretel. Her mom, Miss Kadoya, is voiced by Kathy Bates.
Always nice to see her.
I forgot that she was in this movie, like when I remember hearing the cast listing for it. And then we have Nan, who's voiced by Ellen Burstyn. Toichi, the quiet fisherman, is voiced by Fred Tatasciore. The doctor from the beginning is voiced by Bob Bergen. Kazuhiko from Marnie's past is voiced by James C. Marnie's father is voiced by the always great Eric Bauza. Marnie's mother is voiced by Carrie Walgren. Young Marnie is voiced by Taylor Autumn Bertman. Young Hisako is voiced by Mila Brenner. Old Marnie is voiced by Catherine O'Hara. And if I remember correctly, old Emily, yes, is voiced by Ashley Johnson, who is just a great voice actress and just actress in general.
He is.
It was interesting to see how they balanced out the fact that Anna is constantly going to and from the house and seeing this girl that no one else seems to know about. And it's just slowly building up like this piping hot kettle of twist tea. And we find out that Marnie, in this current day and age, does not actually exist. She was from the past, and how she had this absolutely backstory of just being a caged bird in a metaphorical sense, of her parents ignoring her. And you can kind of get that with how Marnie reacts to Anna's interactions. And when you actually find the twist of who Marnie is in relation to Anna, it's really telling how they wove that into the narrative.
One thing that the kind of structure of this film reminds me of is the first season of Westworld, where our main character, I can't remember off the top of my head now, but she kind of experienced time in a similar fashion where, they would show scenes of like the present and then scenes from like X amount of years ago. And I think that's another reason why I kind of just instantly fell in love with this movie, that they kind of had like that similar structure that I just absolutely adore.
And you find out Marnie's tragic history of she got married to her childhood friend, Kazuhiko, and unfortunately Kazuhiko fell ill, and Marnie had a bit of a emotional and mental breakdown and sent her daughter away to thinking this will be the best for her, and it only made a gap in their relationship that much wider in terms of feeling disconnected and abandoned by Marnie. Then we find out that Marnie's daughter, Emily, who was getting married to some guy that we never know, both die in a car accident. And Marnie ends up taking care of the kid. And then sadly, she passes away from an illness. And that emotional gut punch when you realize that Marnie was Anna's grandmother, it hits you hard. I remember back in 2015 when I saw this, when all of that emotional baggage lands in your lap, all at the same time, just every story beat that you can remember lines up with this. And then I think what actually set me off a little, like in terms of just like becoming a blubbering mess, was Toichi saying his first and only words in the movie, and just how he cared about her and what happened. It all comes together by the end. You can see why this movie won the hearts of the voting body at the Oscars, though apparently not enough to beat out Pixar's Inside Out, which I'm not going to make a whole debate about that. I thought when Marnie was there should have won, but at least for that 1 year of Pixar winning, it was for a very good movie.
Relitigating the Oscars for 2015 is, I think just that year was probably one of the strongest that category has had. So the fact that when Marnie was there and made it in was definitely a good thing.
It was one of the lighter years in terms of animation, because there weren't that many animated films released that year, or at the very least that were released when I was aware of them. Because the Oscar nominations for that year were Inside Out, Anomalisa, Boy in the World, Shaun the Sheep, the movie, and When Marnie Was There. And that's probably one of the best nominee lineups that I've seen in terms of just Academy Awards seasons. And I think it was this year that also let the Annies pull we're going to do a US animation category and a foreign indie animation category, because there were just a lot of good movies that were going to get crowded out in that year. And then when Marnie was there, it didn't even win. It was The Boy in the World, which we'll have to talk about sometime. I think you'll like that movie.
Oh yeah.
But like getting back to when Marnie was there, it was just an extremely touching movie. I would have been fine with this being the last movie if Miyazaki didn't come back or Goro didn't make that Earwig and the Witch movie.
There is something kind of bittersweet about this movie that not only was this the last film that Yonebayashi directed before he moved on to Studio Ponoc, this was the final film of a longtime animator, Makiko Futaki, who would then die in May of 2016.
The experience of watching when Marnie was there is so different from Ghibli's other films that, I mean, I'm not going to say it's like a black sheep or it doesn't feel like one, because we already had that conversation with Ocean Waves, but it's one that I welcome from Ghibli, and I hope they can find other talented individuals who can craft these wonderful stories that Ghibli is known for.
Agreed. I want to see Studio Ghibli find its second act. Kind of like how after Walt passed in the 60s, they weren't really in a, like, the healthiest of positions until about the time of the Renaissance. And I'm kind of hoping that Studio Ghibli has their Disney Renaissance era, you know?
Exactly. I know what you mean. But yeah, this one's readily available from G Kids, and it's on Max. Just call it HBO Max. Just go back to HBO Max, y'all. But now we must talk about the cultural juggernaut, one of the most important Japanese animated films of all time, and probably the film that helped push Spirited Away into winning an Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. We must talk about Hayao Miyazaki's 1997 epic, Princess Mononoke. Boy, howdy, was it interesting to watch this movie again after a relatively few years. Not because I hate it, it's one of the best movies of all time. I love this movie. But I got this new reinvigorated love for it when I was watching it today. And how differently it feels compared to Miyazaki's other film.
Oh, yes.
I mean, I'm sorry it took us so late to get to this one. That wheel was going to land on it sooner or later.
I'll be honest, part of me around the time of this movie's 25th anniversary wanted to just rip the Band-Aid off and say, all right, let's do it now. But I wanted to keep the randomness of the Ghibli journey going, but also this was just worth the wait.
It's one of those animated films that's worth the hype.
Even people I know who are not big Studio Ghibli fans, like Joey from Trash Taste, is very much not really all that much a Ghibli fan, but he even will agree that Princess Mononoke is a timeless classic.
And it also has probably the most well-known backstory of it being
localized.
Yeah, localized. To be brought over here, because Ghibli was not very willing to let their movies come over here after the disaster that was the butchered version of Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind all the way back in 1984 or 85. Unfortunately, the people who got their hands on this was Miramax. And at the time, everyone's well-known ogre monster of an individual, Harvey Weinstein, who is all about that award praise, wanted to get their hands on this. And he was going to ask Ghibli if they could cut out, I think it was 20 minutes or so.
He wanted to chop the movie down from 135 minutes to like 90.
Oh, God, that man was a monster. Sorry, but just like you're cutting out 40 minutes or so. Like, hold on a second. You said 30 minutes or like from 135
135
to.
minutes to 90 minutes.
Yeah, you're cutting out 45 minutes, buddy. You can't do that. That destroys the entire movie.
Which is exactly why one of the producers sent Weinstein a katana with the message, no cuts.
Can't imagine what this world would be like if we had a butchered Princess Mononoke.
I don't even know how that would work.
You can't cut anything. This is one of those movies that's so tightly wound that it would have to be an entirely different movie.
Exactly.
It reminds me of like how some of those big studio execs have just some of the dumbest decision making, especially with right now going on with the strike. And how like Ted Turner was like, we're going to put a color filter over these black and white movies because nobody wants to watch black and white movies.
And then those color versions look like absolutely awful.
It's like they put a jar of Vaseline inside the film reel. Ugh, yeah. But also, what was interesting was the script was localized and worked on by Neil Gaiman, which is why it's so good.
Yep.
So we follow a young man named Ashitaka, who is part of the Amishi village, when he encounters a hideous demon that is coming towards them from the forest. After putting down the demon itself and during the fight, he gets attacked by the demon. His arm gets basically like a curse seared onto it. And you find out that the demon itself was actually a boar god. And with the words of the elders of the village, Ashitaka is sent out to find the cause of this situation, which includes him running into a questionably shady monk, Lady Eboshi of Irontown, voiced by Minnie Driver, and the titular princess of the forest, San, voiced by Claire Danes. The one thing that I feel like works in this movie's favor is how the pieces fall together for this one. Because sometimes Miyazaki will lean more on the pro-nature side of things or the anti-war side of things. This is the one where it feels like it's this morally gray mixing of the two. Because it's not super straightforward. There are no pro-war messages or anything like that. Ghibli is not going to be doing any pro-war nonsense, y'all.
Yeah, of course not.
But like it shines a light on those two themes in a very different way than how he has in the past. Porco Rosso is more anti-war. My Neighbor Totoro is more pro-nature. But this is the one where it's like a balancing of pro-nature, anti-war on like a good 50-50 split.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It has probably Ghibli's more nuanced human characters. Like Lady Eboshi is definitely not a great person. She wants to tear down the nature and countryside and kill all forest deities that get in her way, and is willing to kill other humans to get what she needs. On the other hand, she also saves a multitude of people who were looked down upon by society, whether they worked in brothels or were lepers. And that's interesting. But then you look at the nature side. It's obviously a good thing for nature to not be disturbed and destroyed. But then some parts of the pro-nature side have very morally dubious actions that they want to perform. Like when you see the ape tribe in the film, instead of just being like with the wolves and like, hey, pro nature and all that stuff, they're like, we want to eat the human. And it's just like how the animation portrays the ape tribe as these ghoulish, shadowy entities with the red glowing eyes.
I thought that was a really cool choice to frame them as almost like demon-like in all cast and shadows.
It's like while not all the humans are terrible in this movie, not all nature is good in this movie. The only nature entity that are innocent are the forest spirits.
Yep.
Because even like the wolf gods want to cause havoc and chaos on the humans. And the forest god, I mean, he's good. I wouldn't call him an evil entity, but he's willing to end the life of individuals if push comes to shove.
Very Machiavellian in that they will do whatever it takes to reach a particular goal.
It's like a balance and such. Like nature cannot overtake too much, and humans need to find a way to have a passive and peaceful symbiotic relationship with nature. And you don't get that with a lot of Miyazaki's movies, that it finds this perfect tug of war game between the humans and the spirits of the forest.
Almost like morality is on a spectrum and isn't just black or white.
Like even Ashitaka, who, like, I like Ashitaka. I love the characters in this movie. Ashitaka, and I was telling you about this earlier in a messenger, he's kind of like Nausicaa in a way. A very straightforward good guy who just wants peace. But there's not too much else to him. He's just kind of a kind individual who wants there to be peace among the humans and the spirits. Where San has more of the moral drama arc of the story of being a human who grew up among the spirits, but it has her world turned upside down when a human shows her kindness. Her animation is so good of how animalistic she is when the raid on Irontown happens.
Oh, yeah.
She crawls, she moves fast, very animal-like, which makes sense.
Because she was raised by wolves.
Then with the war aspects of the movie, I don't think there was a single part that made anyone using a gun or a sword cool, because there's that fine balance in movies where like every war movie is anti-war, but you never want to slip onto the side of look how cool it looks.
We know how Miyazaki feels about war. It's very commendable how this movie, and I guess even Porco Rosso, they do such a good job of not glorifying the violence.
Exactly. Like, this is probably Ghibli's most violent movie as well.
It absolutely is.
I remember when I saw this when I was 10, and I never saw so much violence and gore in an animated movie before. And I'm not saying this is like a late 80s, early 90s OVA gore fest, but when you've never seen the main character shoot the arms off a person or someone's head, and the goopy, wormy mass of the corrupted forest deity before, I was just like, I think I almost fainted. Like, it's so tame now, but to think back then, like your first hyper violent experience.
If this was your first PG-13 movie, these images definitely leave an impression.
Because like throughout the 80s and 90s, it's all about like, no, the hero doesn't kill anyone, and yet here's violence galore, arms and limbs being blown off, people dying horribly, either by bullets, wolf, or the big gloopy mass of death at the end. And yet they make sure to keep it in the these are terrible things that are happening. Not in a condescending way either. So it's how you frame it that makes the effectiveness of the anti-war message work. And even like Jiko, the questionable monk who's voiced by the great Billy Bob Thornton, he's more whatever will give me ahead in life. He doesn't really care about the outcome of humans and nature, which I thought was very interesting to have a character who's so neutral about the whole thing.
He's kind of like immersed in that regard.
Well, that's what he is. That's what they all are. They disguise themselves as hunters and monks, but are really hired hands. And I don't know what it is about this dub, but this dub, and maybe it's because it was just early on in the release of Ghibli films in the US, but the voice director, Jack Fletcher, it just sounds so not modern. And maybe that's because of the very specific voices that they chose.
It could be that. I can't remember where I read this, but I think like when Miyazaki was coming up with the story, he was very inspired by John Ford Westerns.
That makes a lot of sense.
I have to assume that the English voice cast, kind of understanding these references, leaned into that even further.
Because there's no like anime or like early 90s dubbing situations with this one. Everyone sounds pretty natural, though it is still funny to remember that John DiMaggio has dubbed anime before. Most of y'all would know him more from, like, of course, Futurama, Adventure Time, and all that stuff. But he did do a lot of voice acting for anime when he started out. But there's just something, like, interesting about how Billy Bob Thornton worked in his role as Jiko, where it's just very dry with his delivery of his lines. It works that he's such a distinct voice. They got some really distinct people here. Billy Crudup, who y'all would probably know more as Dr. Manhattan from the Watchmen film from Snyder, plays Ashitaka. Claire Danes as San brings this great, like, angry weight to San. Minnie Driver is just fantastic as Aboshi, though it is funny to know that when this film was released in the US, it was the same year as Tarzan, where she played Jane Porter.
That actually is pretty funny.
And then we also have one of the Irontown folk, Toki, played by Jada Pinkett Smith. And I'm wondering how, like, I have to assume that's like one of her first voiceover role performances. And she sounds great doing it.
She does.
There's none of that, like, wonkiness that could come from actors who never voice acted before. They brought the weight that was needed. Like, we also have Koroku, the one person that Ashitaka saves, voiced by John DeMita, and y'all would have heard him from Demon Slayer as Jigoro Kuwajima, who was Zangetsu's, or whatever, the blonde character's mentor.
Oh, yep.
Y'all would also know him as Silverfang from One Punch Man. But then I totally forgot Gillian Anderson was in this as Moro, the wolf god. And she brings this cool, collected strength to the character. And then we have Keith David, who plays the narrator at the beginning, and as Okoto, the giant boar god that they encounter later on. And, well, do we need to say more? Keith David is just the best. His voice brings wise wisdom to this pig god.
I can't think of a single performance where Keith David was miscast. That's how good he is at everything.
Even if the film or whatever that he was in wasn't great, he's always the bright spot in everything that he's in because he's just the best. But we also have other voice actors that include Tara Strong as Kaye, the Amishi village girl from the beginning, Debbie Derryberry as the elder that sends Ashitaka on his way, But we also have like Adam Paul, Alex Fernandez, Corey Burton, David Rasner, Dwight Schultz, among other people like Tress McNeil, Patrick Fraley, Pamela Adlon, Michael McShane, Julia Fletcher, Jack Fletcher as like background voices and vocals. I wish I knew who played Oso because the leopard that Ashitaka encounters later on, because I loved his voice and just that wary tiredness to the character and how he's like the moral compass to Eboshi in some regards, or at least tries to be the moral compass to her.
I can't remember who voiced him either, but I agree. He is definitely that moral compass that does eventually sway Eboshi to the right side.
Exactly. And maybe it's just because we've been watching so many of the digital paint era versions of Ghibli films. But it was nice to go back to this cell animation look from Ghibli. And of course, there were uses of CGI, but of course, the best use of CGI is when you don't notice.
Exactly.
I love the little details in the animation from time to time. Like anytime Ashitaka does something violent, the curse grows on his arm. And it only grows that violent action happens.
Of course, being a Dragon Ball fan, the first thing that would come to mind is like, oh, is he going Super Saiyan? Whenever that happens.
Oh, what was that M symbol that was in the Buu saga?
The Majin?
Yeah. Like something like that. Where it would just kind of drive you to do your worst actions and whatnot. And it's just a beautiful movie. There are so many iconic shots in this film that I think are just as good or should be homaged as much as the Akira motorcycle pose that, is all over the place.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There is something interesting about this movie. And not just because this was one of the first times Miyazaki was like, I'm going to retire. You hear me? I'm not coming back. And everyone being like, okay. There were other versions of this movie in production, and there's an art book that's out that is like all about early versions of what Princess Mononoke was going to be before what we got here. It keeps those outfits that Kaye and Yamishi people wear, but there is also like a Totoro like entity, like this big cat that would move around on a top.
Interesting.
Which, of course, some elements probably went into My Neighbor Totoro for that. And I need to buy that book. It's a very interesting piece of history because it's kind of like how a lot of Disney movies are, where they would have some idea for a movie. It wasn't coming together. They would scrap it, but they would take bits and pieces of it to put into other movies. Kind of like how Chanticleer was going to have his own movie. It got canceled, but then he got moved to be the narrator in Robin Hood. Or how in Home on the Range, they brought in elements of the Pied Piper. Like stuff like that. Animation is a wild production history of no linear directions. Let's just say that. This also might be Joe Hisaishi's best musical score. I like this one just as much as Spirited Away.
I'm not ready to say like which of his scores is my favorite, but I get why people say like this one is their favorite, because I'm pretty sure I've heard like some pieces from the score before I saw the movie, and then once they came up and like as I was watching them, it's like, oh, okay, I remember this.
And it's just so beautiful and ethereal. It just brings this like spirit world, god-like deity vibe to the scenery around our characters. Like, man, Ghibli loves its natured landscapes. And just that beautiful shot of Ashitaka with the two injured Irontown workers going through the forest, and just how otherworldly it is with the trees popping out of the water. And then that one shot, a herd of deer going between the trees. And then you see the forest god. Or like the scene where the forest god's feet touch the ground and you see flowers bloom but then die as he keeps moving.
I think that's one of my favorite scenes, just because of everything from like the actual design of the forest god to the animation of all of that greenery.
It's just beautiful, like just beautiful stuff. If I remember correctly, the scene, the forest spirit is becoming like when he's the night walker and then goes back to being the deer. Took like I think a year or so to make. And I mean that's saying something because this movie is just gorgeous. Apparently Miyazaki himself oversaw each cell of the movie. And I think there's 144,000 cells used in the movie.
Yeah, that tracks.
And he retouched apparently 80,000 of them. You can't say he doesn't care about his work. It's just such one of those perfect movies. And how it tackles stuff like anti-war, the environment, sexuality. I mean, there's a reason why so many people talk about this movie. There are essays upon essays of how this movie tackles everything.
I think this is probably like the one Ghibli film other than Spirited Away that has probably been discussed like the most. And, you know, it makes sense. This was the first, if you don't want to count the Wind Warriors and the old dub of My Neighbor Totoro, this is like the film that popularized Studio Ghibli in the West.
I would say that's correct. It didn't push it quite enough, but it pushed the interest and popularity of their movies enough to the point where Spirited Away picked up the baton and ran with it. I know a lot of people would have rather Princess Mononoke done that, but that's not how history works sometimes. And unfortunately, anime at this point in time was not seen as a big deal until movies like this came out, to where it's like, oh, so not everything is hyper violent and misogynistic.
Yep.
But I think it's time we spin the Ghibli wheel, unless you have any other final words.
My only other final thoughts are watch this movie and then watch it again and then just really appreciate the artistry of traditional cell animation.
Exactly. But now we're going to spin the wheel twice. So let's see where it lands. Okay, we're going to get this one out of the way. We're going to talk about Isao Takahata's Pom Poko. This was his response to Miyazaki's My Neighbor Totoro. Just like cute animals and nature and such. So that one's going to be interesting to talk about. It's kind of considered one of the weakest films from the studio, but we'll have to see if time has been kind to it.
And number 2.
We're reaching the least liked films from the studio. We're going to be talking about Tales from Earthsea, Goro Miyazaki's first movie.
Oh, lovely.
Now, from what I remember, I actually remember liking it, but I do remember having issues with it. So, unfortunately, we will not be talking about the tale of Princess Kaguya or Ponyo next. But in some regards, that just leaves us with the cream of the crop the next time we talk about the Ghibli Journey.
They can't all be winners, but who knows? Maybe we'll end up on the more positive side of the discussion.
Exactly. I feel like that can happen. I mean, I like to think we are way better than a lot of those internet media creators who are like hyperbolic and are for some reason like not ashamed of telling people in their to their face that their work sucks.
It's going to take a lot of time for the rest of the internet to unlearn that behavior.
I just wish it was sooner than later, but for now, that's it for this episode. We were going to do Metalocalypse, but we had to change it around, so we decided to talk about Superman when Marnie was there and Princess Mononoke.
Yes, but next time, it is time for the Doomstar.
Alrighty.
But until next time, Cameron, where can everyone find you online?
You can find me on Twitter and Blue Sky at Cam's Eye View. I have a website called camseyeview.biz where I review films and shows from around the world called The Other Side of Animation. I also have a Patreon at patreon.com/camseyeview. That's where you can find me.
And you guys can find me on various social media at Captain K42. You can check out my quick thoughts on letterboxd.com/Coach K42. And you can follow Renegade Pop Culture on Facebook and whatever that site is called now at Ren Pop Culture. You can also find us on YouTube, on Podchaser, subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/Renegade Pop Culture. Listen to all of our podcasts on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen. And last but not least, everything can be found at renegadepopculture.com. You can escape, so do we. That'll do it for this episode of Renegade Animation. We will catch you guys later. Peace out.